The mansion stood like a monument to wealth, its marble floors gleaming under chandeliers that seemed to drip with gold. Outside, luxury cars lined the driveway, each one a symbol of the life Richard Langston had built for himself. He wasn't just wealthy. He was a billionaire whose name commanded respect in boardrooms across the globe. Yet inside this empire of opulence, Richard was haunted by a quiet question. Who around him truly cared for him, and who was only dazzled by his fortune? For years, he had been surrounded by people who smiled when he entered the room, who praised every word he spoke, who bowed to his presence as if money itself radiated from his skin. But Richard was not a fool. He knew admiration and love were not always the same thing. And so, one evening, he devised a test. Something bold, almost theatrical but necessary. He wanted to know the truth. In his hand, he held 4 envelopes. Inside each was a single black credit card. Limitless, powerful, the kind of card only the wealthiest in the world ever touched. But the card were not for his business partners or for his wealthy friends. They were for 4 women in his life, each of whom, in one way or another, had expressed loyalty, affection, or admiration for him. There was Amanda, the socialite who never missed a gala. Beautiful, glamorous, and always perfectly dressed, she spoke often of understanding Richard in ways others did not. Then there was Caroline, a business associate who mixed charm with cunning, her eyes sharp and calculating even when she laughed. The third was Julia, young and full of energy, who flattered Richard constantly and filled the air with sweet words of devotion. And finally, there was Maria, the maid who had served him faithfully for nearly a decade, who never asked for more than her wages, who moved silently through the mansion, unseen by most but always present. Richard invited them all into his study, the firelight casting long shadows across the room. They sat uneasily, wondering why a man of his stature would summon them together. He didn't waste time. Placing the envelopes on the polished desk, he said, "Inside each of these is a black credit card. I'm giving one to each of you. For 1 week, you may spend as you wish, no limits, no restrictions. At the end of that week, you will return and tell me how you used it. Then I will decide what this gift truly means." The women exchanged glances, shock, disbelief, and excitement flashing across their faces. Amanda's lips parted in a delighted gasp. Caroline's eyes narrowed as though already calculating. Julia nearly squealed, and Maria simply looked down, unsure if she had heard him correctly. The week that followed revealed more than Richard could have imagined. Amanda wasted no time. The moment the card touched her hand, she was in the city's most exclusive boutiques. Designer gowns, diamond jewelry, limited edition handbags. Her days became a parade of purchases, each one more extravagant than the last. She walked through high-end stores as if she owned them, whispering to herself, "Finally, the life I deserve." She even hosted a lavish dinner for her friends, boasting that Richard had trusted her with such power. The card became her crown, her proof of status, her ticket to a world where she shone brightest. Caroline took a different approach. Calculated and deliberate, she invested. She purchased fine art pieces she knew would appreciate in value, rare wines to be stored and sold later, stocks in companies she had been researching quietly. To her, the black card wasn't just a tool for indulgence. It was a weapon of strategy. "Richard will see I'm not like the others," she murmured one night, sipping champagne in her penthouse suite. "I know how to grow wealth, not waste it." Every move she made was a performance of intelligence, designed to impress him. Julia, on the other hand, reveled in excess. Nightclubs, luxury vacations, private jets. She used the car to live out fantasies she had only ever dreamed of. Surrounded by flashing lights and cheering friends, she posted pictures online, tagging Richard subtly, making sure the world knew she was close to him. "He'll love this," she giggled to her friends, tossing receipts onto hotel beds. "He'll see how much fun I am, how alive I can make him feel." But beneath the laughter was something emptier, the quiet belief that money equaled love, and the more she spent, the more she proved her devotion. And then there was Maria. For days, she didn't touch the card at all. She kept it in her apron pocket, glancing at it while she polished silver or swept the floors. To her, the black card was not a gift. It was a burden. She lived simply, her modest wages supporting her 2 children and her aging mother back in her small village. What could she possibly need that required a billionaire's limitless card? But after nights of restless sleep, she made her decision. Maria walked into a grocery store. Not the expensive markets where Richard's chef bought delicacies, but a small, humble store near her neighborhood. She filled carts with rice, beans, milk, bread, and vegetables. She paid with the black card, her hands trembling, and then delivered the food to struggling families in her community. The next day, she went to a children's hospital, quietly covering the bills of parents who were drowning in debt. Later, she visited her own village, where she purchased medicine for the elderly, supplies for the school, and repairs for a broken well that had forced families to carry water for miles each day. Every swipe of the card was not for herself, but for others. She never kept a receipt, never took a picture, never boasted. She returned home each evening exhausted, her apron smudged with dust and her eyes heavy with tears. But in her heart, she felt lighter than she had in years. When the week ended, Richard gathered them once more in the study. The women entered with different energies, Amanda glowing in diamonds, Caroline with a folder of investments, Julia with a tan from her whirlwind trips, and Maria in the same simple dress she always wore. The fire crackled softly as Richard asked them one by one to share what they had done. Amanda went first, twirling a bracelet on her wrist. I invested in myself, Richard. Clothes, jewelry, dinners. You wanted to see how I'd live if I had everything. And this is me, shining at my best. Caroline smiled coolly, sliding her folder across the desk. I was practical. Art, stocks, wine, all smart purchases that we'll appreciate. I didn't waste your money, Richard. I multiplied it. I thought like you. Julia laughed as she showed him her phone, brimming with photos of luxury and laughter. I gave you fun, Richard. Look, this is the life we could have together. Excitement, travel, never a dull moment. Don't you want someone who makes you feel alive? Then came Maria. She looked at the card in her hand, scratched and worn from use, and placed it gently on the desk. Her voice was soft, steady. I didn't spend on myself, sir. I used it for others. Families who had no food, children who needed medicine, people who had no water. They needed this more than I ever could. I hope that was okay. The room fell silent. For a long moment, Richard said nothing. He leaned back in his chair, his sharp eyes drifting from Amanda's glittering jewelry to Caroline's meticulous folder, then to Julia's glowing photos of indulgence. Finally, his gaze settled on Maria, who stood with her hands clasped, uncertain if she had disappointed him. Amanda shifted impatiently. Well, aren't you going to say something? Richard's lips curved faintly, though his eyes remained unreadable. I will, but first, I want to understand. Amanda, you say you invested in yourself. Caroline, you multiplied wealth. Julia, you bought experiences. And Maria, he paused, you gave it all away. The contrast hung in the air like a blade. Amanda crossed her legs, flashing her diamond-encrusted heels. Isn't that what people do with money, Richard? Enjoy it? You wouldn't have all this. She gestured at the towering bookshelves, the gold-framed paintings. If you hadn't treated yourself. Caroline's voice was smooth and persuasive. She wasted it. Let's be honest. What Maria did wasn't smart. It was sentimental. You wanted to test vision, didn't you? Strategy? That's what I gave you. Not handouts. Julia giggled nervously. Come on, Richard. She's sweet, but you and I both know fun matters. Life isn't all business deals and seriousness. You deserve someone who makes your heart race, not someone who gives your fortune away to strangers. Maria opened her mouth, but Richard raised his hand gently, silencing the room. Do you know what I've learned about money after all these years? He asked. His voice was low and deliberate. Money reveals a heart. It strips away masks. What each of you chose wasn't about the card. It was about who you are. Amanda bristled. So what are you saying? Richard stood, his tall frame casting a shadow over the firelight. I'm saying I've seen everything I need to see. The following days changed everything. Amanda's purchases made headlines in glossy magazines, but Richard didn't call her again. Caroline tried to arrange meetings, sending him detailed reports of projected profits from her investments, but his silence grew louder with each attempt. Julia flooded his phone with photos from her new adventures, yet Richard never responded. Instead, he found himself driving late at night to neighborhoods he had rarely entered. He sought out the grocery stores where Maria had filled her carts, the hospital where parents cried in gratitude as bills were erased, and the village where children now played by a repaired well. He didn't announce himself. He didn't tell them who had funded it. He simply watched, absorbing the raw gratitude etched on every face. And then came the moment that sealed a conviction. One afternoon, Richard pulled up to a small community center he had never noticed before. Through the open doors, he saw children running, laughing, clutching toys that were clearly brand new. At the front, wearing the same modest clothes she always wore, stood Maria, handing out food, smiling as if she carried the weight of the world but refused to let it crush her spirit. Richard stepped inside quietly. Maria noticed him only after a little boy tugged on her apron, pointing to the tall man in the doorway. Her eyes widened, but she didn't rush to greet him. She finished helping the boy tie his shoelace, then finally approached. "Mr. Langston," she said softly, almost embarrassed. "I didn't expect to see you here." He glanced around the room, his throat tightening. "This is what you did with the card." Maria nodded, lowering her gaze. "They needed it more than I ever would. I didn't want to disappoint you. I know it wasn't smart like Caroline or glamorous like Amanda or exciting like Julia, but it felt right. For the first time in years, Richard felt something stirred deep within him. Not the rush of a business victory, not the pride of a fortune well earned. Something purer, gentler, something he thought he had lost long ago. "You didn't disappoint me," he whispered. "You reminded me what all this," he gestured vaguely at the life of wealth surrounding him, "was supposed to be for." Maria blinked, unsure how to respond. In the weeks that followed, the contrast between the women grew sharper. Amanda demanded answers, her tone turning sharp when Richard finally told her that her obsession with status had blinded her to anything real. Caroline scoffed when he told her wealth without compassion was meaningless, accusing him of being soft. Julia cried, insisting he was letting go of the one person who could make him feel young again. But Richard no longer wavered. He had seen enough boardrooms to know strategy, enough galas to recognize performance, enough empty laughter to feel its hollowness. Maria, however, gave without expecting anything in return, and in that, he found the rarest truth of all. One evening, he asked her to join him for coffee. She protested at first, wiping her hands on her apron, embarrassed by the idea of sitting with a billionaire in a public cafe. But Richard insisted. They sat by the window of a small shop, the world rushing by outside. Maria sipped her drink quietly, while Richard studied her as if seeing her for the first time. "Tell me something," he said at last. "Why didn't you spend a single penny on yourself?" Maria shrugged. "Because I already have enough. A roof, a job, my children. That's all I need." "Enough?" Richard repeated slowly, almost to himself. He thought of his sprawling mansion, his endless cars, and his art collections. For the first time, the word enough felt like freedom. The more time he spent with Maria, the more he realized the test had not been for her. It had been for him. He had given 4 women the same power and expected to be entertained, maybe even validated. Instead, Maria's choices held a mirror to his soul. Months later, Richard made a decision that stunned his world. He announced the creation of the Langston Foundation, dedicating a vast portion of his fortune to causes Maria had quietly supported for years: hospitals, schools, and communities in need. Reporters clamored for interviews, investors whispered in disbelief, and society's elite speculated endlessly. But Richard cared little for their opinions. At the heart of the foundation, working not as a figurehead but as a guiding force, was Maria. She never sought the spotlight, never dressed differently, and never boasted. She simply continued what she had always done, giving quietly, humbly, as if kindness itself was her currency. And Richard, for the first time in his life, he felt truly wealthy, not because of what he owned, but because of what he gave. The story of the 4 black credit cards spread far and wide. Some scoffed at it, dismissing it as foolish. Others romanticize it as a parable of wealth and love. But for Richard and Maria, it was something simpler. A reminder that true value is not measured in what you can buy, but in what you can give. As they stood together one evening, watching children laugh under the glow of string lights at a newly renovated community park, Richard turned to Maria. "You know," he said softly, "when I gave you that card, I thought I was testing you." Maria tilted her head. "And now," he smiled, "now I realize you were the one testing me." Maria laughed quietly, shaking her head. "I wasn't testing anyone, Mr. Langston. I was just doing what felt right." Richard's eyes softened. "Exactly. And that's what left me speechless." The night air carried the sound of children's laughter, the kind of sound no amount of money could buy. For Richard Langston, it was worth more than all the diamonds in the world. And for the first time, he didn't feel alone in his empire. He felt human. He felt home.